In America, we must not allow our educational system to become a two-tier system, a system which says that if you have the money, you're going to get help from the federal government, you're going to get a voucher to send your kid to a school that may cost $50,000, $60,000 a year, while the public schools will end up being segregated not just by race, but by class. Most families in America do not have $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year to send their kids to private schools, and it's absurd to provide public money to make that possible. Our job is not to take away money from public schools to give it to private schools. It is to strengthen public education in America.
The first 4 weeks of Donald Trump's presidency have been a complete disaster, with promises from his campaign already broken. And speaking of broken, he is tearing apart our government bit by bit and piece by piece, along with his co-president Elon Musk, really the two most corrupt men in America. But if there's one success that Donald Trump has unfortunately had in his presidency, it has been with distractions. The key to Donald Trump being able to carry out its agenda is distracting the mainstream and corporate media from covering every horrible thing he does. And there are lots of them, but we have to be able to focus. But unfortunately for Donald Trump, although these distractions have had a bit of success, one is coming back to bite him in the butt in the form of a lawsuit from the country of Mexico. Yes, Mexico firing back at one of Donald Trump's latest stunts. And we are going to get into all of that. But before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way, and it really does mean a lot to me now. Like I said, the media has been too distracted from the promises that Donald Trump has broken and caught up in different circuses, but someone who locked in and called out all of the disasters of the Trump presidency was Lawrence O'Donnell. But so before we go into this lawsuit, I want to check out what he had to say.
Well, if you disapprove of the job Donald Trump is doing as president, you are not alone. 52% disapprove of the job Donald Trump is doing as president in a new Marquette University poll released today. And that is 2% more than the total number of people who voted against Donald Trump in the presidential election, which means that some of those Trump voters now disapprove of Donald Trump, maybe a couple of percent of them. And they have a right to disapprove of Donald Trump's job as president if they believed Donald Trump in the presidential campaign when he said this.
When I win, I will immediately bring prices down starting on day one.
Well, we're past day one, and today the business news media was buzzing, not in a good way, about a surge in inflation reported today. Inflation shot up during the month of January, and that may have tipped some Trump voters into disapproval of the job Donald Trump is doing because of that day one promise that prices would come down by sunset on Inauguration Day. Now, I, for one, do not blame Donald Trump for the increase in inflation in the month of January. But then I didn't blame Joe Biden for the increases in inflation during the Biden presidency. And I didn't blame any previous president for increases in inflation during their presidency because presidential action usually has very little to no impact on inflation. Usually no impact. So my news coverage rule is that I don't blame the president, whoever the president is, for increases in prices. Unless the president takes flagrantly inflationary action, as Donald Trump has proposed doing with wildly inflationary tariffs that he has not yet imposed, because someone must have told him just how inflationary his tariff ideas are. Jim Farley, the CEO of the Ford Motor Company, is living in fear of the Trump-threatened tariffs, but not so much fear that he is afraid to speak out against them like most business executives. The CEO of Ford said a 25% tariff across the Mexico and Canadian border will blow a hole in the U.S. industry, the auto industry, that we've never seen. Today, the guy who said he would stop inflation on day one of his presidency wrote, "Biden inflation up!" exclamation point. Now, anyone who has the slightest literacy in economics knew that Donald Trump was lying about cutting inflation on day one during the campaign, but the Marquette poll indicates that some Trump voters are not in a forgiving mood about that.
There has not been nearly enough pushback from the mainstream press, as Lawrence O'Donnell laid out. There have not been nearly enough questions asked about Elon's corruption, his criminality. The stooges who are helping him break our government, not nearly enough. And it's probably because they're afraid Donald Trump began his presidency, and also in the days and weeks leading up to it, making sure the media understood that they would be targeted. And we again saw it recently with the AP being removed from the White House press corps, not being allowed to come and ask questions of Donald Trump's press secretary, Carolyn Leavitt, until they officially call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. They are intimidating press in whatever way they can. And that example right there has actually kind of come back to bite Donald Trump in the butt, because Mexico is taking action against the ridiculous Gulf of America announcement from Donald Trump. And I want to get into that right here. Mexico threatens to sue Google over Gulf of America. Change Mexico on Thursday threatened to sue Google over its changing the Gulf of Mexico's name to Gulf of America for Maps users in the United States to comply with President Donald Trump's executive order. We do have a dispute with Google at the moment, President Claudia Sheinbaum said at her morning news conference, and if necessary, we will file a civil suit. Trump signed executive orders renaming the Gulf of Mexico and reverting the name of North America's highest peak, Denali, back to Mount McKinley. Soon after his January 20th inauguration, Sheinbaum argued that Trump's order referred only to the part of the continental shelf belonging to the United States. What we are saying to Google is check the order that was issued by the White House and signed by President Trump. You will see that it does not refer to the entire Gulf, but to the continental shelf. She said, Sheinbaum. Google had maintained its position even after her government sent it a letter objecting to the renaming. If they continue to insist, we will too. We are even thinking of a lawsuit because they are even naming Mexican territory, which is our continental shelf. She said, it is ridiculous that this is the conversation we are having to have right now when the campaign was allegedly for Donald Trump all about the price of eggs, the price of groceries, and sure, prices were rising. But they are again. Now inflation is at 3%, which was a shock to most economists. But I guess it shouldn't have been, considering Donald Trump promised tariffs for the last few months, as we know, a direct tax on consumers. And even though he has pulled some of them back, yes, of course, it was all a stunt, as it always is with Donald Trump. There were lots of companies who were preparing for, if it wasn't, they didn't want to hike prices all at once, so they were slowly raising them. And once they have, why would they bring them down? People are paying for things. They have no incentive. So Donald Trump, even though in some instances he is not putting tariffs in place, has already made consumers pay for what would have been masterful gambit. Sir, you're doing a great job on the economy. Inflation was the thing he always talked about, and he's still blaming President Biden for his actions now. But like I said, it's ridiculous that this is what we're talking about, that we're not finding ways to actually improve the country, but rather, I don't know, change names. Republicans always accuse Democrats of being so obsessed with aesthetics and culture and how things look, what we say. Controlling speech, that's quite literally what they're doing. Instead of focusing on policy, but what a shock. But unlike the ridiculous MAGA folks, some Democrats, most Democrats, almost all Democrats are actually focused on what matters, which is what Bernie Sanders was doing in a grilling of Linda McMahon, Donald Trump's nominee for Secretary of Education, talking about the issues that matter right here.
In America, we must not allow our educational system to become a two-tier system. A system which says that if you have the money, you're going to get help from the federal government, you're going to get a voucher to send your kid to a school that may cost $50,000, $60,000 a year. While the public schools will end up being segregated not just by race, but by class. Most families in America do not have $40, $50, $60,000 a year to send their kids to private schools. And it's absurd to provide public money to make that possible. Our job is not to take away money from public schools to give it to private schools. It is to strengthen public education in America. Let me reiterate my concerns. Every person on this panel, and I would hope everybody in America, wants to make us the healthiest country on earth. And I applaud Mr. Kennedy for raising the issues and talking about some very important truths. But what I am not hearing from him are some very specific policy issues that we absolutely need if we're going to make America healthy. It is unquestionable that when 68,000 Americans die because they can't afford to go to a doctor, you got to deal with that. And I have not heard one word about the need for universal health care that exists in every country on earth. When 1 out of 4 people can't afford prescription drugs because the pharmaceutical industry is ripping us off and charging us 10 times more in some cases than the people in other countries. I have not heard the definitive answer I need that we're not going to pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. And one of the points I think that Mr. Kennedy made, which is right, healthcare is not just medical care. It's a lot more. Talk about the food industry. We have held a hearing, Senator Cassidy and I held a hearing a couple of months ago, where we made the point that the food industry is in fact poisoning our kids with addictive food that is leading to obesity, diabetes, heart conditions, etc. And I hope that our Congress and the White House will have the courage to take on a very powerful food industry and demand that the products that they sell our kids are in fact healthy and non-addictive. In many ways, what the food industry is doing today is what the tobacco industry did 50 or 60 years ago. And we talk about making America healthy today. Again, it's not just doctor care, medical care. We have millions of people working for starvation wages. You cannot be healthy if you're working 50 or 60 hours a week and you can't afford the rent that your landlord is charging you. Stress kills. Stress makes us sick. So, Mr. Chairman, let me just say this. I think the issues that have been raised in this hearing today are of enormous importance. I look forward to working with you and other members of this committee to make sure that we develop the policies that have the courage to take on very powerful and wealthy special interests.
This is what we should be focused on, not naming bodies of water, not Donald Trump getting upset that he didn't get his preferred pronoun for the body of water by the AP. It's ridiculous. There are more important things to talk about, and they're mostly Donald Trump screw-ups, and we're going to be talking about that every single day on this show. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button. You can leave a like on this video. And if you stuck around at the end, you can drop a blue heart in the comments. Until next time, I'll see you soon.